Hey guys, good morning, Boker Tov.
Boker or.
So really excited to be sitting here today. I wanted to share with those who are listening in and have made it their tradition of listening in that today we're being joined by Ben Kreshtool, our ritual director, and Cantor Emily Ellentuck, our head of school. And the reason that they are here and not Rabbi Schwartz is a crazy reason, but in the entire week, we didn't have Rabbi Schwartz and I didn't have 20 minutes that actually overlapped in free time.
I believe it.
So
I believe it.
So we decided to have guests today, and I'm so excited to have both of you because we're going to dive into Chayei Sarah. And actually, this is my bat mitzvah Torah portion.
Oh, was it?
It was. It was. My sister-in-law can actually, like, without looking at the Chumash, or she can actually still remember her entire Torah portion, or at least some of it, an impressive amount of it. I feel like that is not true for me, but I still have an attachment to it. So.
I think I can get through the first Aliyah.
Oh, you can? Nice.
Only because it's the weekday Torah reading. So
I
already did it
certainly
twice.
didn't memorize it enough to do that.
Yeah, it's a nice thing. But Chayei Sarah, it's, I think, let's sort of dive into the story. It's an interesting thing. And Ben, you picked up on this, during the week where you spoke about, it's called Chayei Sarah, which means the life of Sarah. But the truth is that it really starts with death, and it's Sarah's death, and she's 127 years old. The Torah tells us that in sort of a funky way, which I maybe we can dive in for a minute to that. And then all of a sudden we see, Sarah's died. She lived for 127 years, and Abraham is sort of in this pinch where he realizes that he has this really important stuff to do, which is basically take care of Sarah's burial arrangements. And it's always an interesting thing, and I'd love to start there with you. Just this idea of Abraham, like, in this moment after Sarah dies, right? Like, she's just gone through a lot. She woke up one morning and her husband and her son that she had, prayed for and yearned for her entire life, had in her 90s, with this like miracle child, if you will, that they're gone. And her husband nearly sacrificed Isaac, their son. And, they thankfully sort of came down the mountain, and that near-death experience, turned into sort of an experience where he was able to return to life. But at the end of the day, we don't really hear anything from Sarah after that. We just see that she's died.
Right. Some say that she died of heartbreak.
Yeah.
It's a nice idea in the commentary. And you do have to think about, it's just like the rough time that they had. And not just because of the Akedah, the almost sacrifice, but also like all the other family troubles involving like Hagar and all the other stuff that was going on. It just seems like super rough, to deal with it. And then having that sort of traumatic event and to come back, and it's sad. It's kind of sad to see it, through this lens. And also, when you are involved with the Torah, you sort of become like friendly with the characters of the Torah.
Yeah.
And, when you spend a lot of time with them, it's sad when they go, and it's, for me anyway, it's sad.
It's so funny that you say that, Ben. I always think about that, sort of like how we talk about our ancestors, right? So it's an interesting thing. I'm wondering, actually, Cantor Emily, if you have something to say about this too, that in some ways, the words that we say in the language that we choose actually, sort of shapes mindsets, right? And, for us, we're talking about really our ancestors. And so, when we talk about them as characters, it's true because we read their story, but also just to think of them as these like human beings that, if we turned back our family photo album, like, or their diary,
right?
like it goes all the way back, which is sort of a cool.
It's super cool to me. And it's a powerful idea.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And especially when we're teaching our children and we're teaching the words of the Amidah, to make sure that they stop and they realize that they are saying these names, and that we don't just breeze through them, but we actually say, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzhak, that we're saying God of each of them separately, and that each of them is important in their own right.
I love that. And trying to, like, as you were saying, Ben, this idea of, like, we're attached to them, right? I mean, I think that's for sure one of the things I love about your reading of Torah. Not only is it very beautiful, but you also, you you really sort of believe in this connection.
100%.
And in, and I hate to say like in the stories of, because again, it sort of makes it seem as if it's like a story, but like the narrative.
I think you can say story and not have it mean like it's not real.
Right.
Like I tell
right.
stories about like my grandmother.
Right,
Like
right.
and these are stories. For me, I still feel those that I am a link in a chain that goes all the way back to these people.
Yeah.
Right? And I am a link and part of that chain. And that for me is a powerful idea. And so, yeah, we can tell their stories. And it's just as if, I mean, they're really a part of us, like really a part of us.
It's so interesting because I feel like there have been different times in my life where I've kept a journal. Through my teenage years, I did, and I think into my 20s I did, but really in my teenage years, I was a big journaler. I had something called the Old Country Diary, and I used to write and like put clippings in there. And recently, my kids, well, I don't know if I found it. I think I found it first and then they found it. And Noah was like stealing my diaries from when I was 16. And that was super interesting, and 17 and 18 for her to read. And I kept like going into her room and rehiding them, But I feel like in some way we're so lucky to have Sarah and Abraham's stories that's captured.
For sure.
And then, we sort of lose many generations in what you referred to as a link. But it's an interesting thing to be able to go into our ancestors' lives.
Yes.
And see, as you were
100%.
saying, sort of some of the complexities.
Absolutely. And to really see not just like stories, but also their feelings and somehow relate to some of those just human emotions and experiences of death and jealousy and some other things that we see in upcoming stories that have to do with parenting.
It's real. It's super real.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing that you're right. So the parenting stories for sure, parenting plays a really central role, I think, in some of what we're about to see. Here, I actually think it's interesting, though, because I would say in this Torah portion with Chayei Sarah, we're talking about how we take care of the dead.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about securing a burial place. And I also think it's interesting. I recently was invited to speak at JCS, did an event in conjunction with Levinson's.
Oh, that's nice.
And it was called, The Greatest Gift.
Oh, yeah,
And
sure.
it was about being prepared for death, actually. It was a spectacular, if anyone is listening to this and is interested, JCS has this incredible binder called The Greatest Gift.
Yes.
I deeply regretted not having it earlier because I felt like I would have done that with my dad.
I am a
so helpful.
huge proponent of pre-planning and thinking about these things. It is such an act of kindness you can do for your family and for yourself. Because I see all too often,
Right.
People who have not thought about this. And, the last thing you want to be thinking about when you've lost a loved one is where you bury them. And the grief is clouding your mind and your judgment. And I've seen people regret, where they've put their loved ones because they haven't been in the right mindset. You do it in advance, like Avraham. Well, he didn't really do it in advance.
Well, Avraham didn't actually.
But he didn't do it in advance. But he took the time to do things deliberately, carefully, and with respect and dignity, without letting the grief, I think, cloud his judgment.
So, Ben, I actually want to stop there for a minute because maybe people don't know that Ben actually oversees the Bethel Cemetery. And in fact, I believe your formal title is the...
No, my formal title is ritual director. I decided that the cemetery is a ritual thing that fits into my portfolio.
But what's your cemetery role in our community?
Oh, so I this is a separate.
Like as a hobby.
It's not a hobby. It's
your side hustle that you don't get paid for.
Well, I do not get paid for. When I took over the Bethel Cemetery, all of the cemetery directors in the area sort of are part of the Jewish Cemetery Association of Greater Baltimore, which is an arm of the Associated. It's an agency of the Associated, which actually cares for cemeteries whose congregations no longer exist. So what happens when the congregations go defunct, the cemeteries still exist, and there's these perpetual care funds to sort of nominally take care of them, but there's no people left to do it.
Right.
And so it's Chesed Shel Emet, so the JCA takes over the cemeteries and makes sure that they're maintained properly, and very few burials will still do. But make sure that Baltimore's Jewish history is taken care of. The memories, being stewards of memory is part of our job, and making sure that those cemeteries are cared for appropriately. That's just like a side thing.
I love that. So Ben, first, thank you. It's a huge mitzvah. But going into the text, I actually would think, and Emily, I wonder how you read this too, but I actually read this as sort of a warning, not intended by God as a warning. I think in that day, it was perhaps sort of what happened. But in today's world, all of a sudden, you're sort of catapulted into this place where even Avraham, like the, sort of extraordinary Avraham Avinu, even he sort of has to hustle or has to sort of run around. I mean, I'm imagining he just lost his beloved wife.
And
right?
it seems to indicate the text that it was like sudden, that it wasn't a long time coming.
Well,
Jacob is ill and he's bedridden, and we see that, and we see some of our other people in the Torah. We see that they're like failing in their health.
Right.
We don't have a heads up here. We don't know what's
That's
happening. It sort of
true.
alludes to what you were saying about how she sort of died of heartbreak. It seemed to be like maybe not something he was thinking about.
It's so interesting because really we think of certain things that we want to see happen in our lifetimes, right? And two of those things are going to come up in Chayei Sarah that we read this week. The first is, we want to take care of the people that we love in their lives and also in their deaths, and to honor them, and to, I always feel like burying them is our way of tucking them in.
Yes.
To that sort of eternal, resting place for their bodies, and then as their souls go to the next world. But the other thing that Abraham needs to take care of and is sort of running around trying to do is he's got a son who needs to, find his besheret.
He wants to marry him off.
Yeah, he does.
But he's very specific about wanting somebody from his hometown, and he has
That's nice. I think it's nice.
He has very specific directions, but he's not up to doing the job himself.
It's so interesting because I feel like as someone who's spent 16 and a half years in Pikesville, right? You're you just came here, but can't you already feel that that's such a Pikesville thing too?
Come on,
bring your loved. If you find someone, bring them back here.
Absolutely,
Right.
You want your kids near. He doesn't want Isaac to, live somewhere else. He gives very specific directions. Find somebody from my hometown and bring them back here for Isaac.
Yeah.
Do not let them. Don't let Isaac go to them and live there. So that's a big burden that was put on his servant.
Eliezer.
Who we don't have in the text the name Eliezer, but we have that name Eliezer associated with him. But Eliezer is God help me with this, right? And kind of puts together his own little test. How am I going to find this kind, perfect person? God help me. I'm going to go to the well, and whoever gives water to quench my thirst and the thirst of all these camels, which we know camels take quite a lot of water, especially after a journey. This is who is going to be the perfect person to come back for Isaac. And God comes through pretty quickly. It's the first person that he sees that he approaches and says, "May I have some water?" And she says, "Yes, and also for your camels." And he's like, "Okay, let me take this just one step further." And after she's brought enough water, he asks, "Well, can I come stay by your family?" And she says, "Yes, and I have food for you and also some."
And look, she doesn't even ask her dad. She just does it anyway.
Rebecca's very independent, though.
Yeah.
I think we see that in the dialogues that follow.
For sure.
Right?
This level of kindness that's beyond.
Yeah.
And she has that quality of being a hostess, kind of like Abraham has.
I think you're spot on.
Yeah.
I actually think that Abraham and Rebecca, there's so many commonalities in them. I feel like it's interesting that, it's not surprising that Eliezer was this is the one, right? It was so familiar to him.
Right.
Her character traits and her values were very much like Abraham, his masters, And so I feel like it really was a beautiful shidduch, if you will.
Absolutely.
And Rebecca,
You're part
just
of the
as you
family.
said, right. You you are part of our family. You
literally.
are part of our family. You belong in our
Right.
family. You're like us.
Yeah.
But it's just so interesting what you're saying because, the way that we see, later on in this parsha, Rebecca caring for Eliezer, and toasting him. It's so similar. She does exactly what Avraham does when he was in the tent and the strangers who are really angels come by. Yeah. And we really see Ben, as you were saying, sort of this independent woman who makes decisions by herself, who's not scared to go into the unknown, just as Avraham did, who's like,
Right.
Hineni, here I am. I'll go with you. She's like, I'm ready now. She
And
takes
what's
care.
also amazing is that at that time, women didn't really have a voice.
Yeah.
And yet they turned to her father and her brother, and turned to her and said, are
Yeah.
you willing to go with Eliezer?
Yeah.
They didn't just make the decision
It's
for her.
probably because they knew what kind of girl she was. And like, well, I mean, she's going to do what she wants anyway. So they're just, you're cool with this, right? Like,
I actually feel like in the text, if you look at it, you can so imagine. I mean, I'm going to sort of play around, but I feel like, they're eating. Rebecca goes upstairs. They're trying to make this deal. And finally, like, she's up doing her makeup or whatever, she's like reading her book or whatever. And they say to her, like, Rebecca, will you go? And she's like, I'm in, like it's sort of like this funny moment where you just feel like woman's power. And I think it's beautiful. So, I know we have to wrap up in this parsha, but I do think that the two sort of important moments of Chayei Sarah is Avraham taking care of those two things. One,
for sure.
finding a burial plot for his beloved Sarah, which, we didn't get to go into, but it's an interesting thing. Like, he has to buy that plot from the Hittites. He has to insist that he's going to pay for that in the Cave of Machpelah, which is a huge and important site, historically, and also in this moment in time and in the lives of our Jewish people. And then the other part is that he has to fulfill this mission to marry off his beloved son, Isaac, and he does. And, we know that it turns out to be a great and a very beautiful match, and that Rebecca, fills an important need in Isaac's life.
Right. She helps bring back joy to him after his mother died.
Yeah.
Right. And Avraham, too, doesn't neglect himself. Because at the end of the parasha, he also gets married again. So everybody sort of rounds out with like a nice, happy, because they've had so much trauma.
So much love.
And now, it ends. Everybody's sort of taken care of, and it's kind of like a nice little bow.
I love that. So we're going to end Chayei Sarah with a happy ending.
Yeah, it is a happy ending.
And please, God, it should be a good week for everyone. Shavua
Amen,
Tov, and thanks for learning with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.